Okay. Today, my guest is Professor Christopher Bartlett. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Chris as a person, Professor Bartlett as a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Professor Bartlett is a fellow of the Academy of Management, the AIB and SMS. His research focuses on strategic and organizational challenges confronting managers in large and complex organizations, and also on organizational and managerial impact of transformational change. His book, Managing Across Borders, was named by the Financial Times as one of the top 50 most influential business books of the century. And the Individualized Corporation was named one of the best business books by the Millennium by Strategy and Business magazine. He has authored or co-authored more than 50 articles, 8 books, and 100 case studies. His cases have sold more than 5 million copies worldwide, making him the best-selling case author in the history of HBS. He received the AOM, International Management Division's first Distinguished Scholar Award. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. First question, what did you want to become when you were a child?
Oh my gosh. When I was a child, well, my dad had an advertising business. And so I guess as a little kid, my thought was I was going to be like Dad. I was going to join his business. By the time I got to high school, though, that had refined. I had a teacher in high school who was my English and history teacher, but he was also in charge of rowing. And I was very much into rowing as the captain of the rowing club. So then I decided that what I wanted to be was a high school teacher who also coached rowing. That's it.
And where did you grow up?
In Australia, in Brisbane, Australia.
Okay. And can you remember the first moment of awareness between domestic versus international?
Oh, now that's an interesting question. And it's a question that I think probably is more appropriate or is more definitive for people who grew up in the United States or in Europe. But in Australia, just because of our geographic location, you grow up with a consciousness that there is a huge world out there. So as a kid, I remember we were very much part of the British Empire. I remember when the Queen had her coronation in 1953. And then 3 years later, there was the Olympic Games were in Melbourne in 1956. And that was when television also came. And so that was very international. And then television came to Australia with huge American influence. So this sort of British, American, global influence was right from my childhood. We were conscious that we were sort of this isolated little part of a huge, complex world that we were looking out on.
How did you choose academia?
I'm sorry?
How did you choose academia?
Oh my gosh. Well, academia chose me, I think, in a way. Well, it started with that thought about I wanted to be a teacher when I was in high school. But I worked for an honest living for a good while before I became an academic. So I started out when I got an economics degree in Australia, and then I worked for Alcoa, where I became a product manager for roofing products. And at that stage, I was the headquarters were in Pittsburgh, and I was very conscious that even decisions at our little local level had to go up to Pittsburgh. So that sort of international business kind of thing became very much part of my imprint early on. Then I went and did my MBA at Harvard. And after that, I became a management consultant with McKinsey in London. And that was a time when American companies were all flocking to Europe. It was the European Economic Community was evolving to the European community, lots of investment. And finally, I became a subsidiary general manager of the French subsidiary of an American company called Baxter International, a hospital supply company. And so once again, I was sort of in the midst of this headquarters subsidiary tug of war. in the back of so that those issues were always interesting to me, and always that challenge of how you manage the headquarters versus the subsidiary. I grew up, that was in my bloodstream. So when I decided finally to go and get my doctorate, I was very clear that that was something I wanted to understand and wanted to pursue as an academic, as an intellectual pursuit, not just a practical issue.
Something that you wouldn't put in your CV, but any hobbies, any interests?
Oh my gosh, yes, there are way too many. Yeah, let's think. Well, something that I wouldn't put. Well, I loved writing. I've always loved writing, which was part of my interest in joining my father's advertising business. But I've always liked to write. When I became an academic, that was a requirement, although you had to write in incredibly long sentences with footnotes and impenetrably deep paragraphs that no one could work their way through. But after leaving academia 15 years ago now, as I said to you before the interview, I turned 80 in a couple of months. So it's been 15 years since I retired. It's quite a time. But I continue to write. I started off writing just a memoir, mostly for the kids and grandkids, about growing up in post-war Australia. It only went for the first 21 years before we get into the boring stuff about living in the suburbs in Korea and whatever. But this was my misbehaviors in my youth and all my teenage activities and things that I've never told my kids. So finally, I committed that to paper and wrote a book called Barefoot and Boisterous. And now, literally in front of me on my desk right now is the final manuscript of my first novel, which I've just written, and I'm going to send that out and sort of arm wrestle with an editor and see where that goes. But that's writing that has no footnotes and no references. It's just pure fun.
Perfect. If you could do it all over again, what would you change? Is there anything that you would do differently?
Oh, in my academic career?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful career choice. I mean, I loved the experience of working in business, but an academic career gives you mentors who are nurturing and supportive, colleagues who are engaged and challenging, students who are curious and interested. It's sort of a multi-generational, you're surrounded, and yet out of that, it sort of throws you out into a world in which you are an intellectual entrepreneur. You're out there with all of that turmoil and behind you. So would I do it differently? I'll tell you what your question reminds me about, Ilgaz. I was sitting at a dinner party with a faculty member at Harvard. I shouldn't mention her name, but she's a well-known faculty member who invited a group of people. I think there were probably a dozen of us around the table. And she asked the question, if you could have done any career other than become a professor, all of us were professors, what would you have been? And I remember people going around the table, and one wanted to play for the Red Sox. There was no, you could do whatever you wanted. There's no limit. Someone wanted to be a ballerina, I think. Anyhow, when it came to me, my choice, and this says, I think, a lot about I said, what I would love to have been is around the table with the writers and the cast of Monty Python's Flying Circus. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's two aspects to that. One is the group collaboration. One is the freedom of thinking, just the incredible creativity, and then the joy of writing that, all out of that confusion, writing something that then you present. So in many ways, I mean, without the craziness, I guess that's what we do as academics, isn't it? We're the sort of the serious side of Monty Python.
Do you ever say, I wish I didn't leave Alcoa and kept going? Maybe, do you ever think about a different trajectory for yourself? Maybe only in corporate life?
I never regret the decision. And it was triggered by I was running the French subsidiary of Baxter, and I was called to Brussels, which was their European headquarters, and they had a promotion in mind for me, which was going to be an area responsibility responsible for Southern Europe. And I remember coming home on the train, the TE that evening, and my wife and I sitting up over dinner and a bottle of wine and going late into the night talking about it. And out of that decision came, this would have been the sort of the rung to continue to climb the corporate ladder, and the life that went with it, where you do what the company are, you take the next promotion, you move to where they say and so we pretty much decided, no, if I was ever going to sort of cut loose, this was the time to do it. So that's when I applied to go to the doctoral program and begin my academic career. I have no regrets about that. It was a wonderful choice for me.
This is an interesting answer. I sometimes ask my friends, there is this saddle point when Coke, P&G, Unilever ask you to, step into this role, or then your career is going to take off. Obviously, you're going to be moving every 4 years, every 3 years, whatever. It's a choice, and I'm basically asking my friends too, do you ever regret staying, or do you ever regret going back to the other life? So there's the settle point. This is very interesting.
Well, guys, I'm going to tell you a story that I actually continued doing this. When I was in the MBA program, there was a professor who ran a course called, let me recall it, the Individual something and Society. Anyhow, whatever it was focused on the individual and the business and society. But one of the assignments was, imagine how you would like your life to be 10 years from now, 5 years from now, next year. And basically he got us to stretch as to what was the vision of what we were trying to the life we'd like to live, and then come back 3 years from now, what would get you on that path, and then to next year, what steps would you take? And I kept doing that after I left the MBA program, because corporations have those plans for you. They've got career path planning. They've got their strategic plans. So they're doing that. And unless you've got your own clarity about what you want to do, what's the priority for you, you'll by default, travel along their career path plan for you, rather than decide what you want to do. And that's the great thing about an academic life is, it's hard work and there's challenges to get there, but we really do become intellectual entrepreneurs, able to choose our own direction and plot our own research and teach the courses that really engage us. Mm-hmm. It's a great privilege.
What are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? Surviving. No, I'll tell you what I'm most proud of. I'm sure you kindly introduced me with the some of the work that I've done, but the vast majority of that output had another name on the cover, which was Sumantra Ghoshal. And what I'm most proud of is that for more than 20 years, that he and I had an incredibly engaging, satisfying, productive, joyful partnership, which is unusual in academia. It started off, he was a young doctoral student. Actually, he was at MIT at the Sloan School, where he was just finishing up his doctoral dissertation. And he came to a seminar at Harvard Business School where I was presenting the early stages of the research. I was about a year into the research that became Managing Cross Borders. At the end of that class, in classic Sumantra form, he came up to me and said, I want to be part of this research. So I said, but Sumantra, you've just finished your doctorate, shouldn't you just be going? He says, no, I want to do this one as well. So he was determined that he was going to do a second doctoral dissertation and that he wanted to do it with me in this project. So we carved off a piece that could be his doctoral dissertation. That became the beginnings of a collaborative friendship, a true partnership. And I think that's one of the great shames in academia generally, is that we so often feel like we have to do everything ourselves. There's such joy in collaboration. I work best in collaboration where there's back and forth. Mm-hmm. And he and I would have we'd have sessions together, either at Harvard or over at INSEAD, which he was at the time. And we would go hammer and tongs for days, and we'd come out with outlines and questions and propose, and then we go and you do this and I'll do that, and we'll exchange drafts at the end of the month. Anyhow, what came out of that was a productive, joyful working partnership. We traveled a lot, did research together, and a friendship, a really true friendship. So that's what I'm most proud of, that became not just a lasting part of my career, but an important part of my life.
Thank you. About research, I would like to ask you something general. How do you see the evolution from many years ago when you first started as a PhD student, then till the moment that you stopped academic career? What did we lose along the way? What did we gain along the way? How is this IB field forming, in your opinion? This evolution is taking place.
Well, as I said earlier on, I've been retired for a long time, and as I've admitted, I've spent my time writing things without footnotes, and I'm not the most up to date with what's going on now. But for me, the interesting transition that I lived through was that international business, that the tiny little core of international management inside IB grew, that the unit of analysis being not the firm but the manager and managerial behavior, and the structures, the process, the culture, and the challenge of managing across the barriers of distance and language and time and culture complicates the managerial task. And so I think a lot of the earliest IB literature was focused on the firm and as the unit of analysis, or even the larger corporate environment. But I think what I found satisfying and what I found most, because of the background that I described in my own experience in living in corporations, was the managerial process inside of that. Mm-hmm. And that remains, I think, one of the less explored and the more, there's a lot of very good work done that has been done and continues to be done. And particularly as we move from an economy in which the financial resource is still critical, as it was in direct foreign investment kind of things, was always financially based. But now as you move to an information-based, knowledge-intensive economy, that the management of that knowledge resource, you can't manage it in the abstract way you can with financial resources, where you could allocate and control it. But that is embedded in human behavior, and so I just think, and a lot of good work is now being done, I believe, in knowledge management in multinational enterprise.
Yes, I have to tell you, you missed nothing, absolutely nothing. We just discovered that managers matter, and there are conferences on why managers matter and how managers matter. So you missed absolutely nothing. You're at the forefront of the current research. You're doing great. Thank you. So I'm curious about your creativity. I mean, I use your cases. I've read your books, obviously, but how did this come about? What's the source of the creativity? How does one become so creative? What's the process that goes through in your mind to come up with these ideas?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think it for me at least, a large part of it is being willing to jump into great fields of complexity and diversity and dynamism and whatever. So for me, field-based research was always, I wasn't going to be sitting in a library sort of doing financial analysis. I was going to be out in the field in the mess and gathering large amounts of data. So when I told you about managing across borders, the design of that, as you may recall, is 3 companies in 3 industries from three countries. So Philips, Matsushita, and General Electric in consumer electronics, or Unilever and Procter and Gamble and Cow. When you're gathering data of 9 companies around the world, it's a huge and not at a superficial level. You're really getting in there and talking not only to senior management on the front lines. You're drowning in data, and so I'm very happy to keep doing that, and then to stand back and start seeing in that the patterns. Eventually, the more you do this, the more you can start seeing patterns, and then from that creating concepts or frameworks or hypotheses, if you like. That's a large amount of what I've always done, is hypothesis generation rather than hypothesis testing. So a lot of the things that, that I can't prove these things, but we can create a framework of these different models of international, multinational, global, transnational, and so on. And then other people will follow on and sort of do much more detailed, in depth, but from the creativity, I think, is just the challenge of trying to create order out of all of that chaos. It just is such an engaging process. The other part, if I can, Ilgaz, you mentioned that, and I'm delighted that you use my cases, that data that you, in the introduction, you said there were 5 million cases. There's now 7 million cases of my that have been sold around the world. And that, if I had to say there's one thing that I'm proud of, I'm really proud of that, because that means that the work is reaching the students, and that changes, that influences the next generation of management. So you start. So I've always wanted to speak to 3 audiences: my academic colleagues in the respectable journals, and to have that discussion, the practitioners who we're trying to influence and hopefully help and develop, and in a way pay back for their generosity in allowing us into their companies, and finally the students, the next generation of managers. So I think that the creativity comes in part by a willingness to challenge one's thinking, not only about how this is going to look in the next edition of Jibs, but can I then think through how that might translate into an article that Harvard Business Review might present to managers, or how do I bring this into the classroom? When you look through those lenses, all of a sudden ideas become much richer, much more real than just sort of the abstractions that often we speak in.
Beautiful, thank you. And your cases made my career. You saved me so many times in the class. Thank you so much. About mentoring, who was the most influential person when you were going through the PhD program, the doctoral program?
Oh my gosh, I had 3 three thesis supervisors One was Joe Bauer, one was Norm Berg, and one was Mike Yoshino. And in different ways, they were all quite influential. Joe was the more conceptual and theoretically based, and very much up with current literature. Norm Berg was very much someone who pushed me out into the field and encouraged the field research. And Mike Yoshino, coming from Japan, had that international dimension that, one of the great risks that all of us, I think, have in the field of international business, international management, is to break the ethnocentric model, to think differently. And for me, when going to Japan, I had to really recalibrate the way I thought, because I brought Western models into what was a very different set of assumptions, and Mike was very helpful in that. So yes, they all helped me in very different ways.
What do you see? What did you see when you were engaging with young scholars or PhD students? Common problems across the board, across geographies, that is, things to avoid.
Things to avoid. The first thing I would say is avoid the lemmings off the cliff. Avoid the going to the latest hot topic. Because you'll end up in a crowded field where you may duplicate someone else's research or end up sort of putting the latest little refinement on something. So I'd say, look beyond that. So, for example, I mean, if I were in the field now, I'd be looking at what's happening in Africa, because everyone is sort of focused on North America and Europe and Asia, but there are some amazing developments in what's going to happen in. I mean, that's just a random example, but so that'd be one thing. Another thing would be, I'd say, often young faculty get into a sort of a check the boxes approach, that they're told these are the things you have to do to get tenure, and they end up. It's a bit like what we were talking about before about the corporate world, where you end up living someone else's life. Just remember that you are an intellectual entrepreneur, and just go out there and I mean, how many times have you heard, or that any young faculty's heard, follow your passion, but things that really engage and interest you, that's where to focus your attention, not where you think what's the most likely thing to get accepted in this journal or that journal, or what's the hottest topic that I can jump on the back of.
Well, I learned something new. Thank you again. Chris, for the sake of time, what is a question that I should have asked you but haven't?
What is the question you should have asked me? I don't know. No, I think you've covered. I mean, you could ask me about my grandchildren. I'd be happy to tell you about them. But I think we've covered the career side pretty thoroughly.
Let me ask you about the memoir that you wrote. Obviously, did you give it, in all honesty, every little detail, or did you skip some parts?
Let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I can see. Do I have a copy up here? This is it. It's called Barefoot and Boisterous, and that's a picture of me when I was age 10 with a snake. But so did I tell everyone? No, I didn't. There are still some things, especially in my adolescent years, that I thought were probably best left untold. But
what is one thing that you would like to tell your grandchildren from what you learned in life? An advice to them, not academic, but something that.
You know, the thing that immediately leaps to my mind is for a full and fulfilled life, surround yourself with wonderful people. And it gets back to the partnership with Sumantra. It gets back to, well, obviously to my own family, but to the friends that don't bother with the people who are jerks and who are. I was going to use a word that shouldn't be, but anyhow, you don't bother with those people. Get them out of your life. Just embrace the wonderful people in your life. Then I think that's the key to. And the same is true in career. If you're going to find great colleagues, and in most of our institutions there are lots of wonderful people, and there are some jerks and self-centered, arrogant, elbow pushing people. Stay away from them. Don't engage with them. You just surround yourself with great people.
This was delightful. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for the invitation.